Welcome back. On this segment, we're going to talk about um, one of the key aspects of total quality management, and that is customer focus, which raises the issue of what a customer is. So initially, the first couple of slides actually look at some of the benefits of basically paying attention to quality. So one of the one of the challenges in the space with people who aren't in it, so to speak, is understanding the impact that this has on your business. Now, we've talked about before, there are all kinds of different aspects of quality, and there's a bunch of them that are feature and material and aspects like that oriented, where higher quality is more money. But a lot of the most important aspects of quality from a business success standpoint come from the aspects of it that are about efficiency, effectiveness, you know, fewer defects, making the correct amount of things, stuff like that. And it ranges from everything from, intelligent designs that let you produce quality products with fewer components, using materials that are longer lasting, more resistant to temperature changes, things like that. Um, Focus on materials management, right? So just-in-time inventory, things like that. And it's those kinds of activities, particularly, that really can make a huge difference to the results of an organization. So this example, this could be Lear, this could be Linamar, this could be any of those like tier one auto suppliers that from a focus on their on how they managed quality in their environment, from supply to manufacturing to all of those other aspects, saw an enormous increase in their operating margin, right? So to go from 5.4 to over 13% is an enormous change to be able to make in your operating margin. And when we look at financial statements and some of the various different pieces a little later in the course, you'll get a better understanding of kind of what is in that particular segment. EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, and dividends, 300% increase. I mean, that's effectively your profitability. That's a very, very significant increase. Manufacturing lead time. So this is crucial because this allows you to respond to customers a lot faster. So going from 14 days to 2 days is a very significant change. And work in progress inventory turns. Again, we'll talk about inventory turns a little more when we do financial statements and things like that. But essentially, more inventory turns makes better use of the money you've invested in inventory. It also is usually a reflection of less inventory waste. So to go from 23 to 67 turns is a very significant change. And that would free up an awful lot of capital in that organization to be used other ways. And then on-time delivery. Honestly, as a tier one supplier in the auto business, I think if your on-time delivery was only 80%, I would think your customers would have gotten rid of you a long time ago. Just about every one of them, in fact, I suspect every one of them operates on a just-in-time schedule, which means that you're getting your parts for the shift, not the day, for the shift, just before the shift starts. And if you don't get stuff on time, then you're potentially not running the manufacturing line. If you takes 100 different pieces for one particular part of a process, all you got to do is be missing one of them to not be able to complete the process. So on-time delivery is an enormous, important aspect. So to go from 80% to 99.7, 99.7 put you into the game. 80% would have left you outside of it. So it's no surprise that they had all of these positive repercussions and positive benefits from some of the choices that they made to focus on, particularly on those aspects of quality that are about efficiency, effective, things like that. And here's some figures that they've got for the actual number values from it. Now, if we look at what are the key facets of total quality management is what they call a customer-focused organization. Okay, great. So what does that mean? Well, So much of that has to do with how you define a customer. And most people, when you ask them about, what customers, they talk about it's somebody that buys something from you or things like that, which is true, absolutely. But they all tend to be fairly narrow definitions of a customer. And it usually becomes a reflection of what we call a primary customer. We also might call them a direct or transactional customer, which is true. But truthfully, the customers of organizations, it's much broader than that. And in fact, according to Duran, and this is attributed to him, it's anyone who is affected by the product and process. And one of the examples that I usually give is some years back, when I went to replace my car. I took my youngest daughter with me at the time, and she was, probably 7 or 8, I guess, when I took her with me. And we looked at a bunch of different things. And although she wasn't going to drive the car, certainly for some length of time, still doesn't have her license, so she's not driving it anyhow. But the fact of the matter that she was part of the interaction, she was affected by the decision about what I chose to do, because it was going to end up driving her places and her friends and things like that. And there was some influence on the decision that was actually made. And that's not an unusual circumstance. That's very, very common. The food products that you buy at home, right, that are used in your home are a product of whoever's doing the grocery shopping, making the decision. But there's other people in the household that are having an influence on that decision. So when you look at too tight of a definition of customer, right, just being the direct or primary customer, you lose all of those details on the sides. And it's those details, those other aspects of it, that sometimes are equally important, right? But certainly play a significant role. You also have some customer forms that aren't the ultimate recipient of a product or service. So it's important to kind of have a much broader view of what a customer actually is. So we've discussed a little bit about, and most people would get what we would refer to as the primary customer, right? So they're the person who directly receives the output of a process, right? So that's usually the person who's buying something, consuming something. You go to a restaurant, you order a meal, you sit down, you eat it. You're the primary customer, no problem, right? And an awful lot of interactions are done on the basis of primary customer. Well, but you also have secondary customers, right? Again, go to the restaurant, but if you go as a family, right? You may be deciding things for others that are also getting the benefit of some of the decisions that you're doing, right? Or, if I, back to the vehicle, although I purchased it for my use, it was going to have an effect on others around me as well. And it's important to understand that secondary level. And in fact, there's a lot of organizations that understand that there are multiple different customer voices that they need to be able to speak to. Part of the science comes with reconciling those voices. We'll talk a little bit about when we look into segmentation. But it's important to understand that they're there, to understand how to listen to them, and then how to reconcile the messages and the information that you hear from different customer sources. We also have some customers that are referred to as indirect customers, right? So they're within organizational boundaries, but they don't receive the process directly. But they're affected by the outcome of it. So an example of an indirect, for example, might be a shipping company, right? So their job is to move something from one place to another. And one of those, either the recipient or the originator, is the one that would contract with them initially. But in order for them to do their job, they're relying on getting the shipment from where they're supposed to get it and when they're supposed to get it. And if the origin is late in providing it, or hasn't done the right paperwork, or any of those other things, it affects the ability for the indirect customer to do the thing that they're looking to do. So although they're not the reason for the process directly, and they're not receiving the output of it, right? They're an intermediary in between it. They are affected by what goes on. You see the same thing, indirect customers often, to some degree, like within an organization. And one of the other layers we're going to look at in a moment is the whole concept of internal versus external customers. So Most of the customer types that we've talked about, and most of what people would look at are another way to look at them are that they're external, right? So they're located outside of the organization. So the customers that we sell our breakfast cereals to, right? So they're outside of the organization. But there's also customers inside of the organization as well. And those internal customers are a very important part of the overall quality picture. If you can't get it right inside, how do you expect to get it right with your external customers? And in fact, there are some areas within organizations that don't have external customers. Certainly in the latter years of my career at RIM, all of the activities that my teams were focused on were directed at other groups within BlackBerry. Like I didn't have any external customers; they were all internal customers. If you get a job and you work in an HR division within a company, all of your customers will be internal. Um, Quality, get a job in a quality role in one of these larger companies, and all of your customers are internal, right? None of them are external customers. But the things that you do with those internal customers have a direct effect on what the organization is able to do with their external customers. We're familiar with, most of us are familiar with the consumer end user. And you'll notice with these different customer types is that you can have one party play multiple roles, right? So if I'm that car that someone is selling to me, I'm the consumer end user, I'm also the direct customer, I'm also the external customer for them, right? So there are kind of layers to this, and some of them have to do with the role of the customer themselves in the transactional process. Sometimes it has to do with the customer from the standpoint of are they within the organization or are they outside of the organization? And sometimes it has to do with the customer type in the usage, right? So am I a consumer end user? Am I a business customer? Am I a government, right? And again, these are other layers or other variations on the customer's theme. And why it makes a difference is because the product that I produce for a retail consumer, for example, is potentially different than a commercial customer, and is potentially different again from a government or military customer. And although the core product may be the same or very similar, because the use cases and the amount of usage changes, the product itself often changes. Now, sometimes the localization from one to another, it's got more to do with packaging and things that you would put with that particular product than others. Sometimes they're actually different products. As an example, if you look at um, a drill, if you know the drills that they sell through the retail outlets for the do-it-yourself, basically the homeowner, right, are one set of parameters of that product. The ones that are used by contractors have different parameter settings around them. And part of it has to do with durability because it's going to get used a lot more than the one that the homeowner has. The other aspect that'll change about it is the fact that the contractor who's using this all the time is also has a longer duration. So one of the things that you see that's quite common is lots of cordless in retail do-it-yourselfer models, less cordless in commercial, like contractor grade, because the batteries don't. I mean, you'd have to go through multiple. So you either have a multi-battery system to make it worthwhile, or they're corded still in some cases, depending on the use case. And then if there was a specialized one that was used under, you know, a military contract or something, it would again change because it would be used in harsher environments. There would have to be, you know, multiple ways to power it potentially, because it could be used in theater where there may not be access to regular source electricity, so on and so forth. So, I mean, a drill, right? But whether it goes to a retail customer, whether it goes to a commercial, whether it goes to a government, military, or whatever, ends up being a different product because it needs to reflect a different reality for that customer, which is another reason why it's important to understand customer types, who they are, where they are, and then there's a whole science and a whole area around being able to develop a dialogue with those customers, to know what it is they're looking for, and you know how they feel about the things that you're doing, feel about your competitors' products, so on and so forth. So identifying customer types is key, right? Because almost all, in fact, pretty much all of your important service and process management and improvement and all of those other things are driven by are driven by customer needs. And as I pointed out in the drill example, you have different customers have different sets of needs, so you have to be able to adapt to those. Most of your processes are defined by your customers, right? They start and end with usually. So understanding who those people are, being able to identify them, as I said, being able to cultivate a dialogue with them is an important part of the process. All of your customer sat information comes from customers. So again, if you don't know who they are, you don't know how to interact with them. How do you know whether you're going to resonate? If you wait to see whether you sell things or don't, it's too late that by then to get the information that you get back from them. And then ultimately, when you're performing your market research, you'll need to understand what the market looks like. And it's beyond just who you're doing business with today. One of the things that certainly has accelerated in the last 20 or 30 years is that all businesses are finding that the rate of change is accelerated dramatically. And it doesn't look like it's going backwards anytime soon. What you used to be able to do to be successful, you may not be able to do in the future. And you may end up having to change both your business and your customers potentially to respond to, opportunities or even longer term change. Usually the example I talk about um, is if I had a business, so it's a family business, it's been around for, let's say, 25 years now, and we do residential groundskeeping, right? So, and our primary customers are single family home owners, right? So we go to their house, we cut the grass, we trim the trees, we do flower beds, we do that kind of stuff. And that's been a successful business for us the past 25 years. That's great. There's some fairly important changes that have happened in Canadian society over the last 20 or 30 years that have a very direct effect on this kind of business, right? So one of them is the largest single customer demographic in Canada had traditionally been what they called families, right? Which was a single household, and the household would be made up of usually like a mother and father, male, female, could be two males, could be two females, but basically you had that kind of a structure, and then at least one child, right? And I think the average household size was actually it was like 4.1 or 4.2 people or something like that, but that was the largest single demographic in Canada. A little while back, that changed. And now it didn't change overnight, like this change had been coming for some length of time, but it crossed the threshold. And the largest single household demographic in Canada now is single people. So it's a single individual in a home. That makes a landslide change for so many businesses, right? If I did packaged food products, when I was making and packaging things for an audience that was supposed to be 4 people, what I do for that is very different than what I would do for an audience of 1 person, right? And as I said, like it hasn't happened overnight. This has been a long, gradual change. Back to the groundskeeping. So one of the implications of that change is that the way people are choosing to live has changed. And more and more and more of these single person households choose to live in condominiums and apartments and other developments like that. They don't have front lawns. They don't have grass and trees. Now, regardless of how good a job that I did in my groundskeeping business, you never keep 100% of your customer base. You'll always lose some, right? They'll die, they'll move away, they'll decide they've had enough of it and they'll pave everything over. Regardless of whether you did an awesome job, you'll bleed some customers. So your market is going to continue to shrink relatively. Now, the houses that are out there won't be fewer of them, and still they're doing new housing starts and so on and so forth. But what's happening is there's a shift taking place in the market, and your focus on that specific segment of the market is going to have you continue to focus on an area that will be diminishing relative to the rest of the marketplace. So what does that mean? Well, over that short term, right? If you're only going to do this for another 5 years and then retire and your kids don't want the business or whatever, probably doesn't make that much of an impact to you. But if the design is for the business to continue on, and maybe your kids are going to take it over, and there's another 20 or 30 years there, it means that your business is going to shrink probably. Now you could try focusing in a commercial space, and I can start cutting grass at the college, for example, or whatever. Well, there's already people in that space now, so good luck to you. And some of the attributes of what makes sense in a commercial setting don't make sense in a residential setting. So there's some aspects of the business that change. One of the other things that might be more important is if you understand that there are more of these single person households, and they're, more in apartment dwellings and things like that, you might take the things that you know about and the things that are key parts of your business. So if you do, landscaping and trees and all that other stuff, and cutting grass and all that stuff, you understand growing, you understand plants, you understand all of those other pieces. Well, what if you take that understanding and you develop some products or services to meet the needs of this growing demographic? People still want to grow stuff, even if they're in apartments. So maybe there's window box garden stuff that you do. Maybe you start doing workshops targeted people like that help them understand how to grow their own herbs, even in an apartment setting. Or you have a service where you'll come in and take care of indoor plants for people, or things like this. But you basically develop other products and services that are designed to target to that particular demographic and that particular audience. You don't have to give up on the ones that you have now, but you have to recognize that there's not a lot of growth opportunity in the ones you have now, because the market is fundamentally changing. They won't disappear overnight, but your ability to grow your business will become somewhat limited, because the number of opportunities in that space will become somewhat limited. And in fact, your business is kind of matured in that space. But you can take the things that you know and the skill sets and things like that and reapply them to this new demographic, or this newer demographic for you, with different products and services that are better able to meet the needs of that marketplace. Which is why, so like, understanding who I do business with today is really good and is very, very important, but I need to understand who I don't, and what changes are happening, bigger changes overall that are happening in my market space, so that I can adapt my business so that I'm able to be successful going forward. So the last thing I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about is specifically about internal customers. And I'd said before that basically, if you can't get it right internally, how can you expect to get it right outside of your organization? And this is one of the key facets. External customers are absolutely the ones who pay the bills. But if you can't satisfy your customers internally, your ability to do that externally is seriously limited. And when you look at the internal customer groups, it also gives a way for all roles within an organization to have a customer focus, right? If I was an HR person, and prior to looking at things from an internal customer standpoint, like, there isn't anybody externally outside of the company that I interact with directly. Right? Everything is focused. It's just like you're just going through the motions, right? Instead of, really, your job is to be providing services and supports to the employee base. They are your customers, right? The managers of those employees are your customers. If I'm the cleaning staff, right, in a particular place, right, I don't have any external customers, but I have internal customers. And the same approach and the same attention you would give to an external customer, you need to be able to give to an internal customer. So when employees understand that all of them, regardless of the roles that they have customers, and sometimes they're external and sometimes they're internal and sometimes they're both, right? But they're all there, and they all need to be satisfied by the outputs of the processes that we use within our organization. That helps employees understand better of what they need to do, and helps them understand, boundaries and stuff like that a little better. So often in the talk of this, one of the things that I give is, for most people, knowing whether you're doing a good job or not is an important aspect of your experience in the workplace. And it can be difficult to figure out whether you are or not. Even if you have a job description that's given to you, so this is what your job is. Notoriously, job descriptions are kind of difficult to be meaningful. You find in unionized work environments and places like that, they're overly specific and are not all that helpful. In fact, they often tend to isolate, roles from each other as opposed to cement things together. And then outside of those environments, most organizations have very, very little in job description. And so people are not always very clear on what is it that they're supposed to do, or what does a good job look like. And these things are very, very important things. Like, if I'm paying, regardless of what your role is, I'm paying you to do something. There's a contribution you're supposed to be making to the organization. If you don't really know what that is, or your version of it is different than the next person that has a similar role to you, or the next person from that, like, I have a recipe for real challenges. One of the important parts of the internal customer focus standpoint is that what you can do is you can charge employees more with things about the role they play, but bigger aspects about the role that we collectively play together. So, as an example, if I own a hotel, so let's say own a fairly small boutique hotel, and all have different employees do different things, right? The concierge has a particular job. The bell people, or the help with the baggage, has another one. The front desk has another one. The people detailing rooms have another one. And for those people to understand their jobs properly, I need to be pretty clear on what that job is. So often, what you would do is you would show them the job. So these are the kind of things that we'd expect you to do. So front person greets customers, does the exchange, sets rooms out, all that other stuff. That's different than the person who is detailing the rooms. And the person doing the room cleaning has to be clear on, well, what am I cleaning? Am I vacuuming every time? Do I change the sheets every time? What are the judgments? And it's important to be really, really clear so people really understand what's going on. But overriding all of that, and one of the things that I would infuse all of them with, was that collectively, your job is to make sure that our guests have an amazing experience while they're staying here. And when people understand that, which is one of those things that glues people, that means if I'm a room detailer and a customer stops me in the hallway to ask me a question, I'm not going to go, I'm just the one that cleans the rooms. Right? That's not a particularly good experience, right? Somebody asked me about where I might be able to find theater tickets for a particular production or whatever. I'm going to own that issue. I'm going to go, absolutely. I'm not sure, but I know that Joey down in the concierge does for sure. Let's go down there and meet with him and get this figured out. And you'd go down and you'd introduce them to Joey, and you'd explain what it was they were looking for. And then once Joey owned that issue, the resolve it, then you go, that's great. You're in great heads with him. Thanks very much. And away you go. And collectively, you're all pulling together to create the end state that the organization is after, which is that customer having an amazing experience when they're there, right? So understanding how to focus internally, right? And the boundaries around roles and things that you can do to satisfy external customers is really, really important. Some of the best customer service organizations are able to foster a climate where employees actively try to go over and above expectations. Nordstrom, for years, it had a culture where this would happen, where there were certainly no shortage of stories of them personally delivering things to customers at home and things like that, because it was part of the culture. And we'll talk about culture later in the course, but it's such an important part of how your employees respond to each other, and how your employees respond to those in the outside world. Involvement is a key aspect in not only getting good process and good inputs and good feedback, but involvement gets you engagement, and engagement gets you people doing the same things. You want to ensure that employees have the time, training, supports, and everything they need to be successful. There's often situations where you've seen a failure in something, and when you peel the layers back, there's at least a contributing role put forward in basically people were put into a situation where it was virtually impossible for them to be successful structurally. Currently here in Canada, the COVID has hit long-term care homes worse than anything else. And this has really exposed some of the significant structural issues they have in a lot of these facilities. And the personal support workers that work in these places really do stellar service, a lot of them, right? And they work very hard and they go over and above. But in a lot of cases, they haven't been given access to the supports or the equipments or all kinds of other things to actually do a good job. So it's not that they're not trying to, and it's not that they're not, in fact, trying to compensate for the lack of these things. In a lot of cases, most of them are kind of set up to fail because of structurally because of that. Reward and recognition is really, really important in energizing internal customers. We'll talk later about motivation, and we'll look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and kind of the role motivation plays in the workplace. But suffice at this point to say, as an adult in the workplace, your motivation will largely be around um, either self-actualization. More often than not, it's about how you feel about yourself and how you think others feel about you. So recognition and reward that support the customer satisfaction focus, but that are actualized on things that resonate with your motivation level, is a key piece of being successful in this space. Positive reinforcement, which is an important management technique. If you only hear from your boss when you've done something wrong or there's something negative, it's difficult to build much of a relationship or rapport. And one of the big motivators in the workplace that people have has a reasonable amount to do with how they feel about not just the work they're doing, but the people that they work with. And the more engaged and the more connected you feel to the people you work with, the more you will, it keeps you from straying. This may be a good way to put it, right? If you are more connected to the employees that you work with, and particularly to your boss, if you don't, you wake up one day and you don't feel particularly well, you'll be more likely to drag your ass out of bed and go to work because you don't want to let them down, right? It's that kind of thing that creating a positive dialogue environment kind of helps support. Not that I'm trying to encourage people that are sick to go to work, but you know what I mean. And I'm going to leave it there for today. And then the next segment, we'll pick up the second part of this dialogue.